Radiohead's release of their 7th studio album, In Rainbows, was groundbreaking. Many of you will know In Rainbows for its unique, atmospheric, lush, introspective sound on songs like Jigsaw Falling Into Place, Faust Arp, or Weird Fish's Arpeggi. But truthfully, as amazing as those songs are, that's not the reason it was groundbreaking. Let's take a step back before we get right into it. Nobody wants to lose out on potential revenue because they were sloppy about keeping their music secretive before the release date, Radiohead included. Historically, they're usually quite careful about matters like this. Leading up to the release of their 3rd album, OK Computer, when the time came to send it out to writers and pressers, Radiohead had opted to send it in the form of a cassette tape, glued shut inside the player. Their goal was to have the listener hear it all in one sitting, in order, as an album should be on first listen, in their opinion. Of course, there was a dual purpose, as it would be much hassle to get the cassette out of the player. It was aimed to keep the music with the producers, writers, etc. away from prying ears. Once again, they adopted a similar philosophy for future albums. As with Kid A, they sent out digital players with encoded music files, so that the files couldn't be transmitted or copied via the internet. Of course, it's all a little gimmicky, and truthfully, that was kind of the point. It was supposed to deter people from pirating, but of course, if there's a will, there's a way. Not even multi-millionaire bands or record labels can stop that. Actually, that's kind of the whole reason piracy was thriving, because record labels couldn't stop it. And of course, all these anti-piracy and anti-leak measures, or lack thereof, eventually caught up with them. In June of 2003, Radiohead came out with their 6th album, Hail to the Thief. For those who were tapped into unreleased music at the time, not all of this was new. As a matter of fact, an unmixed recording of the album from February of that year had been circulating in the 10 weeks prior to the release. This was, so to speak, their inciting incident. Radiohead as a band were disgruntled with the early leakage of the album, but more for the fact of their unfinished work being on display for everyone to see, rather than at the fans for downloading it, wanting to consume more of their work. Johnny Greenwood went as far as to say, "It was work we've not finished, being released in a sloppy way, 10 weeks before the real version is even available. It doesn't even exist as a record yet." Another thing to consider at this time in Radiohead history is that after releasing Hail to the Thief, their contract with EMI Records was up. They could choose to re-sign, find another record label, or go indie. So Radiohead was at a crossroads. Fast forward 4 years, and it's 2007. It's not just the year of financial downturn in the iPhone, it's also the year of In Rainbows. You see, the helm of EMI Records had just been taken over by Guy Hands via his private equity group, Terra Firma. Meanwhile, Radiohead was gearing up to release their 7th album, In Rainbows. Leading up to the release, there were negotiations between EMI and Radiohead on whether or not they would re-sign. During these negotiations, EMI had alleged that Radiohead was asking for an exorbitant amount of money to re-sign and release In Rainbows with them, stating that they, Radiohead, had turned down a £3 million cash advance on the album. Tom York said, on the other hand, that they did not ask for a load of cash from EMI to re-sign. That is a lie. He went on to say that they wanted further control over their catalog, which EMI wasn't willing to do, even though that was what they cared most about. Mr. Hands wasn't interested, so neither were we, was what he had to say on the matter. And with that, and much back and forth with EMI, Radiohead went off on their own, with no label to their name. Truthfully, this is what they had wanted. This was a
better, happier, more productive
Radiohead. With all of this inciting incident aside, we can get into the meat and potatoes of it all, In Rainbows. Again, if you're watching this video, you more than likely have already listened to In Rainbows. If not, you really need to get on that. But for the unaware, In Rainbows is Radiohead's 7th album, like I said, and in my opinion, a perfect album front to back for any mood, time, or place. There's a song for everything. It's a brilliant record and a masterclass in melody. There's weird time signatures and alternate tunings, droning ambience, piano solos, fuzz pedals, and Rainbows has it all, and it meshes together perfectly. Every aspect of musical creation was in harmony, from the songwriting to the composition and arrangement, all the way to the engineering. It was brilliant, is brilliant, and will forever be brilliant. It was their best album since OK Computer, in my opinion. As far as Radiohead records go, for most, the GOAT conversation is between OK Computer and In Rainbows, though you might find a Kid A nomination or maybe the Bends, and rightfully so, they're all good albums. But of course I'm going to leave it up to you to decide which one is the best. Though, for your consideration, Tom York himself said he considered In Rainbows to be their classic album. And while In Rainbows is, in my opinion, a perfect record, The real intrigue isn't necessarily in the music, but rather the methodology behind the album's release. For the 14 years prior to In Rainbows, every single album released by Radiohead was via a conventional record label route. But here we stand now, in 2007, Radiohead is free of these record label shackles and they can release and create as they please. So what do they opt to do? Of course it's not the conventional route first, that would make too much sense. No, they take it to their blog, which very 2007 chic. So on October 1st, 2007, Johnny Greenwood announces via a post that in 10 days, on October 10th, there will be a new Radiohead album out. Well, the new album is finished, and it's coming out in 10 days. We've called it In Rainbows. In the blog post, there was a link to a website, inrainbows.com, which allowed visitors to pre-order an MP3 download of the album. Now, mind you, these are the days where digital downloads are less popular, at least on large-scale releases like a new Radiohead album. And the kicker of all of this? You could choose the price you paid. Whether that was free or $100, you could theoretically pick anything under the sun. Now, many still chose to support their favorite band, with the average purchase price being somewhere around £3. But again, a major artist, one of the biggest alternative rock bands at the time and of all time, was allowing an album to be released for free. And nowadays, that's kind of the whole point. But during a time where some 80% of the world still consumed physical media, an album for free, outside of piracy, was relatively unheard of. Physical media had, up until this point, made it costly to release music. Music which, in terms of the internet, was still in its infancy too. Napster had come out in 1999, and from there piracy had been running rampant with the ease of peer-to-peer file sharing, which Radiohead had been a victim of. So to think that a band would just choose to forego all of their potential profits and just ignore the piracy, it's kind of a weird concept to grasp. An album for free? It's unheard of. Now, Radiohead is known for being kind of unconventional, but as far as releases go, this one was pretty out there. There's no label, there's barely a rollout, and it was kind of just pure distribution of music for the love of the game. Of course, they still made a boatload of money, some $6 million, but the intent wasn't to make money. It was to remove barriers to access their music. Also, to exercise their newfound catalog freedom where they could do what they wanted, how they wanted, when they wanted. Again, evidenced by their unorthodox release tactics. And of course, if you read between the lines, or with all of the context we covered, it can be pretty easily deduced that Radiohead was trying to combat piracy in some way. And truthfully, it was a bona fide way to combat pirates. If you could access the music for free from the get-go, why bother pirating? With the abundance of websites like Napster, LimeWire, and other peer-to-peer file sharing websites, releasing it for a cost was kind of inevitable that it would end up on there. It kind of makes sense to beat them to the punch. And again, like I said earlier, music on the internet is still young. Relatively speaking, it would be like a third grader, so music is learning times tables, on the internet at least. And Napster and LimeWire again was largely facilitating much of the piracy at this time, and that still hasn't changed. There are still plenty of ways to pirate music, television, apps, so on and so forth. I mean, even LeBron is using StreamEast. But to pick such a radically different way to distribute your music just to avoid it is pretty crazy, and it's even crazier to make it free. It was a far cry from every standard of music release, especially at the time. And by a large majority of the public, it was heralded as a defining move for the industry, a revolution in the way bands sell their music. Time magazine said it was easily the most important release in the recent history of the business. And in classic Radiohead fashion, they had, quote, put in motion the most audacious experiment in years, per the New York Times. But of course, that was just the press's positive words. What did the actual artists themselves think? Well, praise came raining in from the likes of Bono, Courtney Love, and Jay-Z, who called it genius. The release as a whole is largely credited as one of the first surprise albums, having not much prior publicity, like a shock drop. This release inspired other drops from artists such as Frank Ocean, My Bloody Valentine, Beyoncé, Drake, and Jay-Z, to name a select few. Though of course they may not have known that Radiohead kind of started this trend, maybe they thought of it themselves. But as far as massive albums being dropped by surprise, they were the progenitor of it all. The novel idea has since been widely adopted. But of course, with the good must come the bad. Not everybody can be a fan. Trent Reznor of Nine Inch Nails thought it didn't go far enough and it was a bait and switch to sell physical media. And Trent Reznor aside, other artists didn't agree either, with one Lily Allen stating, "You don't choose how to pay for eggs, so why should it be different for music?" which aged well, of course, given apps like Spotify, SoundCloud, YouTube, etc., where you access music for free. Maybe with ads, though. Kim Gordon of Sonic Youth and The Guardian had legitimate concerns, with Gordon saying it was, quote, really community-oriented, but it wasn't catered towards their musician brothers and sisters who don't sell as many records as Radiohead. She also argued it could make others look bad for not offering their music for whatever price they wanted to pay. The Guardian's Will Hodgkinson echoed these concerns that less successful musicians might struggle to make a living from their music if this kept up. Regardless of what people think, or thought, In Rainbows fundamentally changed how music was distributed. It started the sort of snowball effect of digital releases. Nowadays, every single artist releases digitally before physical media, at least in most cases. The pay what you want aspect might not have caught on, but as far as digital releases go, Radiohead was ahead of that curve. They created a model that interacted with the fan and gave them total freedom over their music, and it forewent traditional binding record label contracts. So, not only has Radiohead influenced a generation of artists in genres ranging from rap to rock, but they also changed the lay of the land when it came to the music itself. Are they the only ones to attribute to these changes? Of course not. It would be pretty silly to claim that, but it would be even sillier to deny that they weren't at the forefront of the industry at that time, helping to revolutionize the music industry as a whole. So, with that laid out, that, my friends, is how In Rainbows changed the music industry. If you liked this video, make sure to leave a like. If you want to see more content like this, make sure to subscribe. And if you have an idea for what you want to see more of, comment it down below. Thank you all so much for watching, and I hope to find you here again soon.